So I'm going to talk today. My talk is called Metabolism, Fueling the Human Machine. And in a way, the human body is a lot like a machine, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. And I'll also explain what this whole setup means. So first, since this is a city full of attorneys, I'll start off with a disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I never even played a doctor on TV. But I could be so much worse. So what is metabolism? So quick show of hands, how many people here have said something in their past about their metabolism's too fast, their metabolism's too slow, their metabolism's screwy? So actually metabolism sort of falls into two distinct categories. There's anabolism, which is building up muscle. You hear about anabolic steroids, that's where the term comes from. It's taking something simple and making it more complex, building new cells, building new bones, building new muscles. There's also catabolism, which is usually what people talk about when they talk about their metabolism. Catabolism is burning stuff, burning sugar, burning fat, burning protein on occasion. It's essentially taking something made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, combining it with more oxygen, and producing water, carbon dioxide, and energy. So as I said before, your body's a lot like a machine. It's actually a lot like a car. You need fuel, you need oxygen, and so does your car. And if you combine them, they form water, carbon dioxide, and they release energy. So let's say you have fuel and oxygen, and some idiot with a match. That doesn't work out too well. It's kind of pointless. So it turns out what you need is a reaction vessel, something to control it, regulate it, harness the energy. So you get a car. Now you combine fuel and air. You still put out the same things, but since this is happening in your engine cylinders and it's under tight control, you actually derive usable energy from this, and your car moves. So what are you burning? Now, I'll say this much. It's not healthy to drink gasoline. I hope people realize that. But actually, on a molecular level, gasoline looks pretty similar to sugar, and it looks even more similar to fat. So these aren't all that different. And obviously, these are what fuel the human machine. So in a human, let's replace this gasoline with something similar, sugar and fat. Get rid of the gasoline because obviously that's not good for you. Replace the car with a human, and you're basically carrying out very similar chemical reactions, and you're also releasing energy. This is what lets you move, this is what lets you think, this is what keeps your heart going. So now that I've covered this, your car obviously has a fuel delivery system. Well, the human body also has a system for delivering fuel and oxygen and other things. It's called the blood. So how do you deliver these things? Well, sugar is actually very simple to deliver. Sugar dissolves very well in water. This is a bottle of simple syrup, which is about half sugar, half water. It dissolves quite well. Fat and oil doesn't dissolve very well in water. It forms these globs, makes a big mess. So the body needs a way to deal with that. So in come lipoprotein particles, and this is getting into a little bit more of an advanced area. So on the outside, you have phospholipids. Phospho meaning phosphorus, or comes from phosphoric acid, and lipid meaning essentially a type of fat. And so the phosphate on the outside likes interacting with the water of the blood. The lipid on the inside likes interacting with the stuff likes interacting with sort of the core of the particle, which is made up of things that don't dissolve in water. Cholesterol, fats, and fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A. So this is nature's answer to getting oil into water. So how are these things transported around? Well, first off, I'll say, pardon my traifism, but nothing says fat and cholesterol like a double bacon cheeseburger. So you eat the double bacon cheeseburger, maybe without the cheese and bacon if you keep kosher, but it eventually reaches the intestine, gets packaged into a chylomicron. It's a big particle, essentially with the core of fat, and the outside being that phospholipid that just lets it interact with the water. The chylomicron circulates, gets broken down by an enzyme, and you eventually get something called a chylomicron remnant, which is now decreased for fat and has a ton of cholesterol left over. This fat's taken up by tissues like the heart, muscle for burning, or by the adipose tissue, which is what you call your fat, for storage. And the remnant is very quickly taken up by the liver and stored. But it's not stored indefinitely. The liver releases it in the form of something called VLDL, or very low density lipoprotein, which is very similar to this type of particle, the chylomicron. the VLDL is then broken down in the same way. It loses a lot of the fat content, keeps a lot of its cholesterol content, and it becomes something called LDL. How many people out there have heard of LDL? Your doctor tells you to lower your LDL. You hear LDL causes heart attacks. You take Lipitor for your LDL. So this is an important particle. This goes around the blood, hangs around for a couple days, and it can get stuck up in your artery walls and eventually kill you. The good thing is, this particle also gets cleared eventually by different types of cells, primarily the liver, but it does get taken out of the blood. And the reason why they give drugs like Lipitor is to increase the rate that is taken out of the blood. So now that I've covered that, what happens when it all goes wrong? So this is one example. It's called chylomicronemia. This is where you have a defect at the very first step of breaking down those particles. So normal blood should be red cells and then clear plasma, which is what you see here, compared to this. This looks like milk. It has about the fat content of milk, and it's full of these lipid-rich particles. This is actually the mouse I work with at UCLA. And they're actually very healthy. People walk around with that all the time and don't realize it. So how's this process controlled? Well, one of the main regulators of this is actually the pancreas. It's an organ that sits right by your stomach. It helps you both digest your food and respond to the food later on. And it regulates this primarily through insulin. Insulin is a protein. This is a very complicated schematic of it, so I'm just going to simplify it down into a bunch of lines. And the insulin is released by the pancreas directly into the circulation. When it's in the circulation, it eventually reaches individual cells. And so the cells see the insulin, and they know what to do. They realize that what they have to do is take up sugar and fat from the bloodstream. This is a very basic process. This is what controls the fuel delivery in your body. So again, when it all goes wrong. So the first example I'll give when it all goes wrong is type 1 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, this happens very early in life. Your immune system goes crazy and just starts attacking the pancreas. It actually specifically attacks the beta cells that produce the insulin. So all of a sudden, your pancreas can't produce insulin anymore. This is a pretty big problem. The good news is it's also a pretty simple problem, and we can fix it. People can take their insulin from a bottle, essentially. They can use synthetic insulin. And in type 1 diabetics, this is also what used to be called juvenile onset diabetes or childhood diabetes. They just replace their insulin with insulin from the pharmacy, and they go on to lead normal, healthy lives in general. What about when it all goes really wrong? So that's type 2 diabetes. This used to be called adult onset diabetes. Then it became early adult onset diabetes. Then it became, oh my God, they're getting in their 20s diabetes. Then it became, how are they getting into their teenage years diabetes? And now they're getting it as children diabetes, which is connected to the fact that there's less physical activity in this country and there's more eating of junk food. So people with type 2 diabetes start off a pretty normal life. They have this whole insulin regulation pathway running solid. Their problem happens generally later in life, although now later is becoming earlier, where the cells see the insulin and they just don't know what to do with it. This is called insulin resistance. And it's where the insulin receptors are sort of not being paid attention to by the cells. So you have all the insulin you need, your body just pays no attention to it. This causes a few things to happen. Number one, the cells no longer take up sugar and fat from the bloodstream. This means that the sugar and fat in the bloodstream just build up, and you wind up with high blood sugar. That's what everybody associates with diabetes, and that's the real mark of it. Another thing that happens, and I'll just quote a friend of mine named Noam, is if a problem doesn't yield to force, apply more force. And the pancreas is definitely good at applying more force in the form of just cranking out more insulin to try and overcome this. So now the cells are bathed in more insulin, and actually for several years, this will keep somebody going. But in the process, you'll wind up burning out your pancreas, because the pancreas was not meant to be cranking out this much insulin. And just to give an idea of how complex type 2 diabetes is, I gave an oversimplification of it. The reality is, You have problems in the pancreas that lead to problems in the liver. You have problems in the liver that lead to problems in the muscle. You have problems in the adipose that lead to problems in the liver and pancreas and muscle. Problems in the muscle contributing to problems in the liver. It's a very complicated disease, and that's why it's so difficult to treat. And so in my final minutes, I'll just discuss the idea of people boosting their metabolism. Has anybody here not gotten some kind of spam email or seen some advertisement for a way to boost your metabolism? And how many of you thought they weren't trying to rip you off? Well, it turns out a lot of that is either a ripoff or unsafe. So the only method for this that I can really say is good is exercise. It's safe for almost everyone. It's pretty cheap. The only thing is it takes time and effort, and your response to it can kind of slow down. Other things that have been used with differing degrees of success. Cocaine produces really fast results. It does keep people skinny. A couple hundred supermodels can't be wrong. The problem is it also leads to heart failure, strange behavior, addiction, and winning. There's also amphetamines, obvious problems there. Thyroid hormone was popular for abuse at one point, was popular for sort of abuse for this purpose at one point, but it can give you a heart arrhythmia. Xenical keeps you from absorbing fat in your diet. It's actually FDA approved, but it can give you digestive problems because when you're not absorbing the fat, it's going somewhere. There was a drug called fen-phen at one point, got its FDA approval yanked because it was causing heart and lung damage to people, and it actually killed several of them. But a component of it, phentermine, is now FDA approved. It's being used. It can be habit forming, and I've heard some doctors claim that people who go off it gain back all the weight pretty quickly. Ephedra was popular at one point. It also gave pretty fast results, although apparently it didn't give significant results. And it ended up killing a baseball pitcher because it can induce hyperthermia, and the guy ended up becoming hyperthermic and dying of heat stroke. It can also cause strokes, heart attacks, and what I list here is rebound, which basically means as soon as you go off it, you regain the weight. There was the Acai product that's been kind of hot recently, and everybody's been getting advertisements for it. It's probably safe because it's really just an extract of a Brazilian fruit. It's also not known to be very effective, except at removing money from your wallet. It's really good at that, and there's actually a lot of Federal Trade Commission lawsuits against the suppliers now. Vitamins, probably safe. They're vitamins, but they're not really all that effective. Liposuction, very effective way to lose fat, has the drawback of being surgery. So I'll close up now and just say it's not completely hopeless. There are actually drugs on the horizon that will probably help, including by doing things like improving your response to exercise. Because as David Ben-Gurion said, if an expert says it can't be done, get another expert.